Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest this week is another returning guest from a previous podcast, Prabath. So you are, you've moved on since we last spoke. So if you want to give a little bit of background, kind of on yourself and where you're at and how you got there.
Sure, Tony. Thank you so much for having me back on the podcast. Big hello to you and all your listeners. It's going to be a lot of fun to be back. This is Prabath. I go by PK. I currently lead security compliance, assurance, and trust at TripActions. TripActions is an end-to-end business travel and business management platform with over 5,500 customers and around 1,500 employees. So this is my current role, Tony.
Okay. So what? So you're at TripActions, and well, so I'm going to start with one question, and then I had a different thing that just occurred to me. But I want to start with sort of like so what is your role there? Like what are you doing for TripActions?
Sure. Yeah. So in TripActions, I currently lead, as I mentioned, security assurance, trust, and compliance. So as part of my role, I drive several defensive and offensive security disciplines here at TripActions. On the defensive side, I'm responsible for several initiatives, or my organization is responsible for several initiatives like improving the overall maturity of our cybersecurity program, cloud compliance and certification program, third-party risk management, business continuity, data governance, security policy awareness, and also overall building the security governance structure around some of our application security tooling and cloud security tooling and detection and response and so on and so forth, the governance part of it. And then on the offensive side, we also drive several programs around pen testing, and we're building out a red team function and some of those initiatives. And then in addition to that, my organization also serves as the single voice for security, both internally with the employees and also externally with our customers through something that we call as the customer trust program here.
Okay. So the thing that occurred to me is I was curious, given the pandemic, it seems like there was significantly less need for travel, at least for a year or so. I think things are starting to pick up now. I mean, I see a lot more of people I know who are now like, hey, I'm finally traveling again. I'm at the airport, going to go fly somewhere. But I don't know what the actual numbers look like in terms of percentages, but I feel like that was probably dramatically lower, for over the course of 2020 and into 2021.
Yeah, that's right. I think initially when the pandemic started, of course, the numbers dramatically went down. But I think we, as kind of human race, right? I feel like we crave for kind of in-person connections and all of that. So we've seen a dramatic increase in numbers overall. We have real-time data of kind of business travelers, of all of our kind of customers, and we've seen a dramatic increase month over month. Kind of towards a good part of last year, and then a really good recovery towards the end of last year, and also moving into 2022.
Okay. So what's it like? Previously you were at Adobe, and Adobe's among the tech giants. It's a very established company, been around forever. Everyone knows Adobe. How is it to go from working on security at Adobe to working on security at more of a startup, a growing company like TripActions? Sure.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I've been in security for over 15 years now. I started my career, around 15 plus years back as a software engineer after graduating college in electronics and communication engineering degree. I did software engineering for around 6 months or so, and then quickly realized that this is not something that I wanted to excel my career in. So then with my kind of qualifications and aspirations, I started looking at like what else, right? So I picked up a job in a public bank, a pretty large public bank right after that. And at that point, I started working in an IT department of that bank in a pretty small information security team. This is how I landed up in security. And then there, I got an opportunity to kind of dive into different areas of security, like network security. There was a little bit of AppSec because there was internet banking. This was a regulated industry, so there was a lot of compliance, and PCI DSS was just picking steam and all of that. So that's how I kind of got into security and got kind of really immersed into various domains and got excited about this profession overall. So right after that, I jumped on to PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I did a couple of security certifications. CISA was one of them, popular back in the day. I did that and jumped on to PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I did security consulting, security strategy consulting on the technical side and also on the governance side for Fortune 500 companies around the world. After kind of doing that for a while, I was very, very fortunate to have landed a job in Adobe. This was a time when Adobe was trying to reinvent its business model in the cloud, from selling software in kind of desktop shrink-wrap-based model to selling services in the cloud. And then I got it right away with Adobe when the business grew from $30 billion to overall $300 billion, and to kind of grow the security program to kind of fuel that growth and up-level security as the business grew. And did a lot of things there. I think last time I was in the podcast, we spoke about one of the initiatives that my org was driving there on the strategic security initiatives side. I also architected the common controls framework, drove that cross-functionally, then did all of that and built a lot of security teams over close to 9 years. And having done that, things got to a point where I had built a team of leaders that were kind of driving the engine pretty much on a self-sufficient basis. And I felt like, it was time to look for something else. I wanted to kind of recreate that experience of kind of building something from ground up in a totally different industry, and basically challenge myself in a way that I was not challenged for a few years. So kind of with that mindset, I started looking around and spoke to a lot of companies here in the Valley, and then finally picked up this opportunity here at TripActions. Some of the reasons why I picked up this opportunity was, firstly, it was a completely different industry. Adobe was more around, selling services in the cloud towards creative professionals and digital marketers, whereas TripActions, we are a business travel and fintech platform. And then the growth trajectory that this company had was pretty exciting. It was a fantastic product with a huge market opportunity. So kind of all things aligned from that perspective, and the decision was pretty easy. And the journey here has been awesome. I mean, as I said, I'm a builder. I wanted to build something from scratch again in a completely different industry. So this opportunity kind of gave me an avenue to do that. So it has been extremely rewarding from that perspective. And then another thing I would say is the immediate impact. Things move very fast here. So as a result of that, you can see immediate impact of your work, which is very exciting. And then it's great to be surrounded by an amazing set of experts throughout the business overall from a 360-degree perspective and learn from them. So it's been an exciting journey, Tony. Yeah.
All right. Is there... do you feel like there's any specific traits, either from a security perspective or a leadership perspective, that are different between being in an environment like Adobe or being in an environment like TripActions?
Of course, there are certain differences. As I mentioned earlier, Tony, things move extremely fast here. The business moves extremely fast. So as a security professional, I feel like you got to be constantly aligned with the business direction so that you can pivot your strategy quickly based on the fast-moving pace of the business. So one trait I would say from that perspective is constant context switching and aligning yourself in the business and being nimble to be able to pivot your strategy based on where the business direction is going. Another trait I would say is extremely handy in these environments is to kind of build that cross-functional relationship across your business stakeholders, right? Because in security, we oftentimes go to our stakeholders and we have an ask, right? And when you go to folks with an ask, if you have built that relationship and if they know that you're coming from a good place where you're trying to do the right thing for the business, it's much easier to get stuff done from a security perspective. And lastly, I would say that it's extremely important to have a mindset of kind of enabling the business as business is trying to disrupt at a rapid pace and make those changes to kind of disrupt an industry. You having the mindset of enabling the business and at the same time reducing security risk, right? So I would say these are some of the key traits that I'm noticing. Kind of some minor nuances between working for big organizations and hypergrowth startups.
Okay. Well, so while there is some nuance depending on the industry you're in, size of the company, whatever, for the most part, the threat landscape is the threat landscape. The threat actors are not that discriminating in most cases. I mean, you've got your targeted attacks, but a lot of the stuff is just spray and pray, and everyone is a potential target. And as we've seen, so if you take the pandemic, you take all of it, all of a sudden everyone was working remotely. Now you've drastically shifted the attack surface and the sort of the landscape that you've got to try to protect. And now you've got people's home networks, they're working from home computers, so you've got that aspect. You've got the continued sort of explosion of IoT and everything's connected to everything. And then you throw in kind of the spikes in ransomware, and along with the sort of convergence of cybercrime and nation state adversaries. Like, when you look at a lot of the stuff coming out of Russia, coming out of China, coming out of Iran, the line is very blurry, and it's often hard to tell, okay, well, wait, am I being attacked by Russia or by someone in Russia? And ultimately, I would say that as someone in the trenches, as someone protecting an environment, that becomes more of it's a curiosity. Like, you might like to know, but ultimately, like, your job is to defend regardless. And I know I've talked about this in the past, and that a lot of times a company will be attacked, and then the immediate sort of PR response is, oh, well, it was a sophisticated attack from China or whatever. It was a sophisticated attack from this nation state, as if that's an excuse, as if like, oh, well, because it was a sophisticated attack from China, of course we were hacked. When the reality is, you just have to defend all of those things. It doesn't matter what the objective of the attacker was. So all that's a very, very, very long way of me getting to basically asking you what are you doing day to day? What are like the key strategies? What does an organization need to do today to be prepared to protect all of that?
Wow, that's a question summarized in a very apt way, Tony, and it's a pretty loaded question, right? And I can keep talking about this for the rest of the afternoon. See, end of the day, as you mentioned, right, the threat landscape is pretty similar, right? Irrespective of the industry you're in, irrespective of the business you're in, the threat landscape is pretty similar. So I think, firstly, I would say as practitioners and as defenders, it's extremely important for us to focus on the real risks, right? Identify what critical business processes are enabling your overall kind of business outcome, and identify what are the key security risks that exist in those business processes, right? And then risk rank them, and then focus on, kind of reducing that or mitigating that risk, right? I think basically what I'm trying to get here is I speak to a lot of practitioners and a lot of other folks working on different security teams. And what I'm basically getting to here is, I think as practitioners, right, it's important to kind of do exciting stuff and all of that, but sometimes I've seen teams and folks getting stuck on, like, say, science projects, right? What I'm saying is focus on the real risks, right? Focus on what is critical for your business and focus on mitigating that from a strategic perspective. Come up with strategies to mitigate that. Secondly, I feel like as practitioners, as we grow our programs and teams and all of that, engineering automation in all of these security disciplines, it could be application security, your cloud security, your detection and response, your even compliance, right? Automating compliance processes so that all the routine processes can be automated, and the humans can actually focus on the aspects that the machines can't focus, right? If humans are doing repeatable jobs that the machines can do, then I feel like, we are not making the best utilization of, first of all, there's a scarcity of resources here. So we're not making the right utilization of our resources. So engineering automation, I would say, focus on the risks, engineer automation into all of your security processes. And lastly, focusing on people. I think it's extremely important on as security leaders to focus on upskilling your teams, your folks, understanding what drives them, and giving them that opportunity to, kind of satisfy their intellectual curiosity, and giving them with, aspects that actually drive them to make progress. I think is extremely important. So if I have to summarize this, Tony, I would say focus on critical risks, engineering automation, and focus on people. Top three.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the focusing on risks is interesting to me because, I think most organizations grasp this by now. But I had a conversation many years ago with George Kurtz, who's now founder and CEO of CrowdStrike. But at the time he was at McAfee, and we were talking about like Microsoft would have their, Patch Tuesday, they come out with the stuff and they say, oh, well, this is critical vulnerability. And we talked about how, okay, but that's sort of relative. Like Microsoft is saying, basically it has the potential to be a critical vulnerability, but it's still up to you to figure out, okay, well, what systems do you actually have that on? How are you exposed? What other mitigations do you have in place? And so the criticality of it is not purely objective. Like it's subjective to your environment and the controls that you have in place. And so, you can't just take, well, Microsoft says this is critical, therefore I'm going to make that my top priority. You have to analyze it in the context of your environment and say, okay, well, yes, it's critical, but within our environment, this one over here is actually a higher priority because that one is on public-facing servers and we don't have any mitigations in place.
Exactly. I think you're 100% spot on, right? Because we are all, everybody, kind of is operating with a certain set of resources and a certain budget. So it's extremely important to kind of realize, as you said, if Microsoft releases a vulnerability, but in the context of your environment, you might have 1,000 machines that actually are impacted by it, but which ones are actually high risk, right? Based on the context, right? External facing versus internal. And then you got to make those kind of determination and focus on really where the risk is. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Well, and so I sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? I sort of already like answered this somewhat. So didn't mean to steal your thunder, but one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is, well, what are you seeing in terms of someone working in the trenches? What are you seeing in terms of key trends in security? So I mean, I already talked about ransomware and IoT and stuff, but I guess let's go beyond that. Let's go beyond the obvious stuff that I see. What are you seeing?
That's a fantastic question. And we, practitioners talk about this all the time in the community. So some of there are several, but if I had to prioritize, let's say prioritize three, right? If I had to prioritize three, I would say zero trust architecture is becoming a very popular trend. This is not new. I think it's existent for a long time, and it completely depends on the context that you kind of bring up this terminology in. For me, the way I look at zero trust is if you have a user and if you have a resource could be a service or an infrastructure asset, having some kind of a user certificate, device certificate, and some kind of 2FA. And then in addition to that, based on the level of security assurance that you're looking for, you look at all the other attributes that compose that overall identity profile for a user or a device to authenticate into a resource, right? So especially with the increase in overall, the ransomware attacks that we are hearing about, and also with the kind of the remote world that we live in, where users are authenticating not just from corporate networks, but kind of from other networks as well. So building this zero trust architecture, if it's not already in the security strategy for somebody, I'm noticing a lot of practitioners kind of incorporating this. And we lived this journey. I've lived this journey a couple of times in Adobe. We had an extremely successful implementation in our current organization that I work into. We are a big zero trust architecture play. So overall, so this is one trend. The second one I would say, Tony, is business leaders and engineering leaders typically want to innovate at a rapid pace. Product leaders want to innovate at a rapid pace, especially in hypergrowth startup environments, and also in big companies that are in a crazy growth trajectory. So as a result of that, building that DevSecOps pipeline where you can move security to the left, so that if you're an engineering organization that is deploying hundreds and thousands of deployments in a week or in a month, building that pipeline in a way that this can be done without human intervention, and then you have the right tooling into that overall kind of different phases of it, like kind of and your deployment and staging and deployment phase to make sure that you have all the right toolings plugged into this entire DevSecOps workflow to identify a risky deployment, and then actually have a security practitioner or a researcher intervene into that and look at what needs to be fixed, or a developer to kind of intervene and what needs to be fixed. So this one, DevSecOps and shifting security to the left, is another common trend that I'm noticing. And lastly, I would say is this aspect around data security and privacy, right? With the growing privacy regulations globally, and then in Europe, we noticed that there are state-related, some countries have state-related privacy regulations as well. So overall data lifecycle management, data classification, implementing the right security controls based on your criticality of data, and then having some of these common privacy principles, right? Access, deletion, correction, and consent, and all of that implemented is another ongoing common trend. So if I had to summarize, I would say zero trust architecture, moving security to the left using DevSecOps, and data security and privacy. These are top three in my mind. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I agree. I agree in particular with the zero trust one, and then that was actually what when I had Den Jones back on the podcast, we talked about zero trust again, and one of the things we talked about is that, yeah, the concept is, whatever. The concept is actually older than when John Kindervag, kind of made it popular. But it's been popular since John Kindervag was at Forrester and made it popular in like 2010-ish.
Yeah.
And so it's not new by any stretch of the imagination. But I think partly in response to the work from home trend, and partly in response to the rise in the ransomware, like all of the other things we've talked about, are driving companies to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we really need to look at this. And so it's one of the things that has picked up steam. It's one of the things that the Biden administration and CISA have been hammering a little bit to say, hey, look, everyone needs to be doing this. So yeah, that's definitely up there on the radar. In terms of trying to, I guess, sort of, figure out, Are you winning? Are you losing? Are you doing good? And being able to report that back to your leadership and say, hey, look, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing in this fight against threat actors. There's obviously a ton of different tools out there, a ton of different reports, a ton of different metrics you could look at, and I think different people have their favorites, sort of like that's the metric they like to look at, but a lot of them are debatable in terms of like, okay, well, is that giving you the whole picture? What is the real value of that metric? What is it telling you, and more importantly, what is it not telling you? So I'm curious, when you're reporting, when you're looking at trying to measure the success of your program, what are the metrics that you think are the key?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. So before we actually start talking about frameworks and key metrics and all of that, right, I would encourage everybody that is looking at picking a framework or to report on metrics to ask three key questions before picking this, right? Firstly, you need to identify what your customers are looking for, what the regulators are looking for, and then what you need, right? What you need from a reporting perspective, right? So once you kind of start asking those questions and dive a little deeper, kind of answering them and identify that, then you need to think of metrics. You need to think of frameworks through which you can report metrics, right? So the way I like to classify these frameworks in my mind is I look at it at reporting at a program level, reporting at a controls level, and lastly at the behavioral level, right, for security. Now, when it comes to metrics at the program level, I've found that the NIST cybersecurity framework is extremely helpful. I've had a lot of success with that in my career overall. So basically, there are 5 domains that is identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. And each of these 5 domains have a lot of controls, and it's a very, very holistic framework. So, and if you kind of map these 5 domains into your kind of security programs, it kind of touches all areas of your security program, right? So, kind of measuring yourself from a maturity perspective against NIST CSF across these 5 domains. And then on it could be reporting on quarterly improvements, yearly improvements, or whatever from a maturity improvements perspective. I found this to be extremely effective. And then when it comes to controls, I'm a big proponent of having something like a unified controls framework, right? Where you have a controls framework on the back end that maps to all of your different compliance regimes like SOC 2, ISO, PCI, HIPAA, FedRAMP, and regional compliance regimes. And then you have a single control language that you can communicate internally with your employees, and also the effectiveness of which you can communicate externally with your customers as well. It just simplifies the security conversation overall. So measuring your effectiveness against that control set and then communicating that, I've found that to be extremely helpful. And lastly, at a behavioral level, you got to look at what domain of security you're looking at. If you're looking at DevSecOps, then there is BSIM is pretty popular, OpenSAM is pretty popular. If you're looking at detection and response, the Cloud Security Alliance is a framework that you can report on, and so on and so forth. So, but fundamentally, this is how I would classify it at a program level, control level, and behavioral level, and then look at frameworks. And then in addition to that, when you double click on all of this, then you have your traditional GRC metrics, like things like your vulnerabilities, like, week over week, like, what is your vulnerability posture against detection versus remediation. Similarly, when it comes to detection, the time needed to detect an incident and respond to an incident and remediate and all of that, right? They all can fit into this framework, that Uber framework that I'm talking about. So this is my mental map about this stuff, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I do think that frameworks help instead of you trying to instead of everyone trying to invent their own wheel, so to speak. I think using the frameworks and the more we're never going to get everyone to agree on one framework, I don't think, but the more we can, I think it helps. It helps the communication between different companies and organizations and everything else if we're all talking the same language and looking at the same metrics. So I'm going to shift gears slightly, but again, kind of hitting on we're still in this pandemic. Some companies have kind of made the shift back to, the office is open, or maybe it's partially open. They're doing hybrid type approaches of, well, you can go into the office or you can work from home. But a lot of companies are still, fully, in pandemic mode, working from home. So I want to kind of touch on two things in that regard. Number one is, we've been talking for years now about the security skills gap, that we have these, millions of jobs that are, left unfilled, and we don't have the people with the right skills and qualifications to fill them. And what's your experience with that, and how has the, how has the pandemic, helped or hurt that in terms of like your ability to find and retain the right talent? And then for the people that you have on your team, what are your, what's been your experience, or what kind of insight do you have in terms of working with the team remotely, where you're working with the team that, like you used to go into the office and you could all sit down at a table and have a conversation, and now you're dealing with your team like you're dealing with me right now, and what impact has that had?
Great question. Again, a very hot topic in the community overall. Let me address the remote work part first, and then I'll kind of dive into the overall cybersecurity skill shortage and what we can do as a community. Now, in terms of remote work, when pandemic initially happened, this was challenging for a lot of people, especially people managers and leaders. It was a little challenging. Even for me, I was more of a in-person office kind of person, and it was I had to quickly pivot and then figure out a way to kind of motivate my team in this environment. But a couple of strategies that I've found to be extremely helpful, Tony, is to kind of connect with your teammates a little broader than just business and work. Right now, when you're in office, you have all of these small talks that happen between meeting, in your kind of in your coffee room or during lunch breaks and all of that. With remote work, all of that is gone. So I think as leaders, we need to make that extra effort to actually create opportunities for that, right? And get to know, kind of what drives your teams, your teammates, right? It could be different for different folks, but it's extremely important to understand what are some of the driving factors for your teammates, right? Or your people who report to you, and then actually provide them or create opportunities where their intellectual curiosity is satisfied, and provide them with avenues where they can thrive. And this becomes much easier when you know somebody a little bit personally, right? Beyond just the business aspect of it. When you know what kind of a human being that person is, it becomes much easier. And secondly, another attribute that or aspect that I found to be extremely important here is to create an environment of continuous learning. And we are fortunate to be in the field of security where things are changing every day. There are new attack vectors, new threats, there are new technologies. If you look at the vendor ecosystem right now, there's a technology that kind of mushrooms up every day. There's crazy funding going on, and the cybersecurity business is hot overall. So creating an environment of continuous learning, right? From a defender's perspective, I think there are a lot of ways where we can innovate from a defensive security perspective. So kind of creating that environment where teams can learn about these aspects I've found these aspects to be helpful as well. Now, kind of switching gears a little bit to the cybersecurity skill shortage and the talk that happens overall in the community around that. I really, really feel that as a community, we need to do a better job around that, right? We need to do a better job around that, where we are more welcoming towards, diverse set of candidates, and also folks that, want to switch career paths from, different areas to cybersecurity, but are willing to kind of embrace the field and learn and all of that, right? I think we need to, do a better job in terms of overall creating opportunities for that wave of talent. And then finally, I think mentorship. I think the community is pretty vast, and I think especially from a leadership perspective, I think it's extremely important to mentor the right talent so that we can kind of create a path, pave a path for the next generation of cyber talent. So these are some of the things that we could do as a community. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I want to kind of start to wind down, but I wanted to ask, you're in the Bay Area, so going to something like RSA is just, it's in your backyard. That's not as hard of a thing for you as for some people, but you're also not specifically you're not a security vendor, and you also weren't at Adobe. Although Adobe Security often has been at RSA in the past. So I know it got pushed back to June, but do you plan to go as an attendee, to be at RSA and see what's going on there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've been going to RSA every year. Not just RSA. I was at Black Hat and Defcon last year as well. I like to kind of diversify. I at least try to attend 2 or 3 conferences around. I try to either do Black Hat or RSA, and that's where there's a lot of these innovations on the vendor side. You get to know about that. So as a practitioner, that's very important, and also good opportunity to network. And then I try to make it to DEFCON every year because that's where the offensive practitioners come and it's fun to kind of be there and see all the things that happens there. And then I also try to attend. My initial part of my career, I was big into like GRC and compliance and all of that. So I've been presenting in some compliance conferences as well. So that's how I like to look at it, right? Like a security business related conference, like an RSA or a Black Hat, and then DEFCON, and then like a GRC conference. I try to attend one conference in each of these buckets every year. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. So I've never actually stayed for DEFCON. I've been to many Black Hats. I've been there and to see like the incoming DEFCON crowd, but I've never like hung out to actually attend DEFCON. But these things have changed over time, so I can't speak to DEFCON because I've never stayed for it, so I don't know how it has changed really. But I can say that when I first started going to RSA and Black Hat 13, 14 years ago, that I felt like RSA was much more the corporate event. RSA was like that. Companies sent people there to go see what companies should buy. And yes, there were sessions on all kinds of great topics, and there was lots of educational stuff there. But it seemed much more corporate focused. Whereas I felt like Black Hat was more, all right, you're in the trenches a little bit more. It's a little edgier. It's a lot more practitioner focused. And then DEFCON, I always looked at like you're getting into gray hat, probably doing some stuff you shouldn't be doing. But when I look at it now, I feel like Black Hat has matured and evolved to be a lot like RSA was 10 years ago, where like the line between Black Hat and RSA is very thin.
I 100% agree with that, Tony. I was, as you were kind of describing this, that's exactly what was running through my mind. Like Black Hat is getting very, very closely aligned with RSA. And DEFCON is still keeping its roots, though. I mean, you don't have like things like you don't have a name badge in DEFCON. Nobody knows who you are, and you never know. You could be talking to like a script kiddie, or you could be talking to like a CIA agent, right, who's trying to recruit there. So that excitement, they're still kind of maintaining that excitement overall at DEFCON. Yeah. Yeah,
but the one, I would say one of the things too that I think has kind of come in to fill the void in the wake of these things are the B-Sides conferences. So I'm a huge fan of the B-Sides conferences, which went from being a thing they did outside of RSA or Black Hat just to sort of give an outlet for some of the there are hundreds or thousands of talks submitted to RSA and Black Hat, and they've only got so many slots, and a lot of them don't make it. A lot of the ones that don't make it are awesome. And so B-Sides was basically created to be like, well, let's have a counter conference where we give a voice to some of the presentations that didn't make the cut for the main conference. But that has now exploded. I mean, I don't know what the current count is, but B-Sides is going on in 100 countries around the world.
Yeah, I'm noticing that trend as well, and you're spot on there. And I've been to B-Sides a couple of times in San Francisco, and I was pleasantly surprised. The first time I went there, I was pleasantly surprised with the pedigree of speakers and kind of the talks that were happening, right? And I only see this growing because, as you said, submissions for RSA and Black Hat and all of that is kind of through the roof, and maybe a very small percentage of the submissions make it through, but I'm sure a lot of them are kind of missed the boat for RSA or Black Hat are from a super high pedigree, and we need to create opportunities to for those kind of thought leadership to come out as well. And I feel like B-Sides has done a fantastic job with that.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me, and congrats on everything you're doing at TripActions. If fingers crossed that RSA actually happens in June. You never know.
Yeah.
It's 5 months away, so we'll see what happens between now and then. But hopefully I'll be able to make it out there and we can sit down in person for a chat.
Yeah, I would love that, Tony. Looking forward to it. I'm ready for some kind of meeting practitioners back in person again, and I really hope the RSA happens later on this year, and hopefully we get to meet each other as well.
Yeah. Although I will say, so I was in San Francisco on personal business a few weeks ago, and I discovered that the Samovar Tea Lounge is gone. So that was kind of devastating. That's a hallmark of going to RSA.
Yeah.
Now it's a pizza place.
That sucks.
So I don't know if that was a casualty of the pandemic or what, but
probably, yeah. That might be the case, yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Tony. It was a pleasure, and thanks for having me again. Thank you.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.